Good morning and welcome to Edgewater Ramsell's webinar series. Today's webinar is about an upgrade implementation to SDMEE that was completed at SM Energy, and it is hosted by Tony Scalese. Our webinar series targets specific customer interests related to business analytics solutions that include Oracle Hyperion Enterprise Performance Management and Business Intelligence. So we'd like you to email us at seminars@ramsell.com with topics that you'd like to see covered. During the presentation, you may submit questions in the right-hand panel on your screen. Just type the question in at any time, and we will address it at the end of the presentation. Edgewater Ramsell is a full-service Oracle Platinum Consulting partner that delivers innovative solutions to clients that solve an array of business problems and maximize the effectiveness of their strategic, operational, and financial management processes. We remain connected to the design and development of new and changing Oracle products and technology, and consistently apply and update leading practice methodologies that address changing business requirements and take advantage of evolving system capabilities. Our worldwide team of over 200 employees has years of industry-specific experience, certifications on various Hyperion applications, and includes Oracle ACEs, who are recognized experts in their subject area. Services we provide support all facets of Oracle Enterprise Performance Management and Business Intelligence Solution delivery, including consolidation and reporting with the Financial Close Suite, enterprise planning, profitability and cost management, and business intelligence applications and technology. And we offer supporting services for infrastructure, data services and integration, training and support services, and project management. For additional details about Edgewater Ramsell, visit our website, www.ramsell.com. Our recent company highlights include the successful implementation internally of Oracle's Planning and Budgeting Cloud service to provide Edgewater technology with a collaborative forecasting framework that allows them to align key business drivers with operating results. Edgewater Ramsell's Oracle and DECA practice was launched as a continued effort to meet and exceed clients' EPM and BI needs. Our Lightning Cloud for SG&A was released as a fixed service offering to provide clients with a set of pre-built templates, reports, and calculations catered to the SG&A expense planning process within an organization. The service enables a client to configure the pre-built content to meet its organization's needs and is intended to accelerate the time to value of planning solutions. It is one of the first pre-built EPM applications using Oracle Planning and Budgeting Cloud service. Edgewater Ramsell achieved Oracle Partner Network specialized status for Oracle Planning and Budgeting Cloud service to help organizations deploy a solution for their planning cycle in a short time and with a significantly lower cost of entry. And finally, Edgewater Ramsell's Jeff Flack has co-authored a new book about Oracle Data Relationship Management called the Oracle Data Relationship Management 11 Guide, Successful Implementation Essentials. The book examines the functionality of the Oracle DRM software solution, the integration points, and the steps for implementation success, providing a comprehensive reference guide for the user community. Today's presenter, Tony Scalese, has a BA in economics and over 15 years of experience across the EPM suite and has completed more than 50 implementations. Tony is one of Oracle's Business Intelligence ACEs and oversees a team of 9 dedicated integration specialists. He is a certified Hyperion professional in Hyperion Financial Management, System 9, and Fusion 11. Tony is a member of the SDMEE Beta Oracle Development and Product Management teams and has established many innovative design, customization, and automation concepts in financial data management that have evolved into standard industry-wide practices. He attends Oracle conferences as a presenter, delivers Ramsell webcasts, posts regularly on the Oracle Technology Network, and blogs on www.fdmguru.com. Tony?
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to attend this presentation today. If you've attended my previous ones, you know that I tend to have a lot of content and tend to talk a lot and share a lot of information. So I took a slightly different approach to this. I think that this topic's pretty interesting. I tried to keep my content a little more condensed so that we could leave a fair amount of time at the end to solicit feedback and questions from the community so that this could start to become a little bit more interactive, a little bit different of a spin today. We'll definitely talk through some of the technical details, but I'm sure there's going to be some questions around just overall, how does this solution fit into my organization potentially? So in that vein, the agenda, we'll go through the project overview. We'll talk about that a bit. We'll definitely talk about in much more detail the solution that we implemented for the customer, some lessons learned, and then, as I said before, some time for questions. So I know everybody's in a listen-only mode, so normally I'd ask if that's fair, but I won't because it kind of is what it is at this point. So I also like to try to keep these things light and hopefully enjoyable for everybody. So again, thank you for attending. So a bit about the company with whom we partnered to do this. SM Energy is an independent energy company that, as you can see on the slide, engages in acquisition, exploration, development, and production of crude oil, condensate, natural gas, and natural gas liquids in onshore North America. Basically, a lot of natural gas wells, a bunch of them. They'd have a lot of joint ventures with different other companies of their nature, but they operate mainly in the western United States. Think about the Rocky Mountains, kind of north and south there. They're headquartered in Denver, so as you're sitting there and you're trying to figure out why something's not working and you're getting frustrated, you can just take a moment, look out the window and look at the Rocky Mountains and think, life's not all that bad. Really great company, great people to work with, very good adoption of the Hyperion suite of products. The project overall was great. We've partnered with SM for a number of years. This upgrade was just kind of the next evolution in their Hyperion path. So I think we had a really good experience, and I believe they would tell you the same. So let's take a look at their financials for a moment here. You can see that year-over-year revenue growth, 2012 to 13, pretty significant. 13 to 14, continued growth, albeit a little bit slower than over 2012, but still growth. And I think that aligns with what everybody kind of realizes what's going on in the natural gas world and the oil world. Obviously, fracking is an important component, continues to drive growth. So a very strong income statement here. You can see that nicely profitable, great net income growth year over year between 13 and 14. So, just to summarize, $2.5 billion in revenue and $666 million in net income. So, pretty healthy income statement there. So, how does that translate? Well, when we look at things here, they're $2.65 billion market cap. So, fairly good-sized company. 2014. Right at the beginning, was kind of the peak of the stock performance. And 2014 had its ups and downs, down slightly throughout most of the year, up and down, but down a little bit from its high. And then toward the end of 15, we had a drop off in the stock performance. Again, this shouldn't surprise anybody with the way OPEC has continued to kind of flood the market with inventory. That's obviously put pressure on the domestic market here and the natural gas production and whatnot. So I'm not a stock expert, but I look at a trend like this and I go, okay, 5-year trend. They're pretty much where they were about 5 years ago. They've had tremendous growth. Maybe there's an opportunity here. So don't take that as a stock tip. I'm not, doing that, but I definitely think that there's something there that's kind of interesting to look at. All right, so a little bit of background on the company. Let's start talking about the project a bit. So what did we do? It was an upgrade from EPM 11 11.121 to 11.123. When we started this, 2.4 was not out yet, or wasn't out long enough that we thought that it made sense to move to that. Some companies don't like to be very early adopters of new software, so we decided with the 2.3 version that was the right one for us. So the Hyperion Planning, they already have. Hyperion Strategic Finance, or HSF, also already had. And they also had FDM Classic, which was loading to Hyperion Planning. So we made a conscious decision, knowing that FDM Classic was being sunset in 11.124, to make the upgrade to FDM-EE. We wanted to get some better performance. We wanted to use the SAP adapter. So we thought FDM-EE made a whole lot of sense there. So that was a good decision. At the same time, SM Energy was undergoing a project to replace its general ledger. They had an older general ledger, a lot of homegrown components to it, and they decided that they wanted to move to SAP ECC. So they were doing that, and as part of that, they were deploying a new global chart of accounts. So obviously a lot of moving pieces here. When you think about defining a new chart of accounts, obviously that's a pretty big undertaking. New general ledger system, again, fairly large undertaking. An upgrade, not as much for EPM. Obviously, you can move these things up pretty quickly. The rebuild of Classic into EE, there was a fair amount of work there. Not a very long project, but still something that we needed to think about. But the big components here are obviously deploying a new ledger and a new chart of accounts. So when we started the Hyperion portion of this project, they were already far down the path of the SAP implementation. The global chart of accounts had been defined, and when we say we define a global chart of accounts, obviously that continues to iterate until that system is live, obviously through your integration testing, your conference room pilots, your user acceptance testing, and then your parallel testing. You're continually finding things that you want to tweak and go back and rethink. So that happened over the course of the project. But we kicked off the EPM side of the house June 2014. SAP Go Live was for the July or January 2015 close, which would have happened in February. I'll give you the punchline. They made their Go Live date. They've obviously continued to kind of have to go back and tweak and hone things on the SAP side, because again, a new ledger is a pretty big undertaking. But materially, they continue to close their books, and they're closing it now with SAP ECC. So let's talk about the project requirements from an FDM-EE perspective, because again, let's assume that an upgrade is relatively straightforward. From an FDM-EE rebuild perspective, we needed to integrate historical data from the data warehouse. So we did actually rebuild planning with the new chart of accounts. So while I'm kind of backburnering that for the sake of this presentation, that did also happen. So we needed to reload historical data, taking it from their existing data warehouse, applying transformations to it, and loading it into the new planning applications. We needed to integrate the core financial statements of income statement and balance sheet from SAP itself. We also needed to grab volumes. So how many barrels are being produced, how many metric tons or whatever the different measures are that need to be measured in terms of volumes. We needed to grab that from SAP's data warehouse, as well as CapEx data. And we'll talk through why we did that from the data warehouse in a bit. We also needed to automate this whole workflow. So the idea that this would be a lights-out process for the end user or for the administrator to integrate this data so that it could be efficient for them and not take a bunch of time actually doing things. And then one really interesting thing that we had to do here is we had automated the creation of the entity mappings based on the SAP hierarchies. And we're definitely going to drill into this a bit more, because this is what I like to think of as a leading practice, and particularly where we see organizations that have these core financial systems, or potentially DRM, Oracle's Data Relationship Manager, where we can source those relationships to define our mapping. This is really kind of leading edge stuff. So in terms of FDMEE, we leveraged multiple components, and we're going to walk through each one of them. But in general, we use the SAP adapter, so that we'll talk through that. The open interface adapter. We obviously use locations and data load rules, which are core components of FDMEE. I'm bringing those up because we had to do some interesting things there, so we'll talk through that. Obviously, the mapping tables, if you're using FDM, you're using the mapping tables, but we'll talk about how we use them in an interesting way. We used batching to do automation, and then we used a fair amount of scripting to accomplish some of the really interesting things that we were able to build into this application. So before we jump into the technical details, I wanted to give everybody a picture of the SM Energy Hyperion environment, or Oracle Hyperion environment. So if you look at this Visio diagram here, at the bottom of the screen is your source systems. Where are we getting the data? There is core data coming again from SAP ECC. That's the general ledger, where we get our trial balance for our income statement and our balance sheet. We had the legacy data warehouse, and then we had what was called the SAP Rapid Mart. So it's not exactly BW. It's actually an individual, another software component that SM Energy had procured to spin off SQL Server-based cubes and tables, basically a mini data warehouse without being SAP BW. And so we were able to use that to build metadata in the application, and also the mapping tables in FDMEE, which again we're going to talk about. Our middle layer there is our data and master data management. These were EPMA-enabled planning applications. So master data flowed from the Rapid Mart through EPMA for various dimensions. And then obviously FDMEE managed the data integration into Hyperion planning. Customer also has strategic finance, HSF. So they're using the native ability for HSF to move data back and forth. That continued to happen between HSF and planning. FDMEE doesn't interact with HSF at this point. It's on the roadmap. It's coming at some point. But for now, the legacy HSF methodology was used to move long-range plan into planning. And then financial reports, SmartView, both used as reporting tools. So not a terribly complex structure, but there is a fair amount going on in it. All right, so let's talk a bit about the SAP adapter. The SAP adapter is something that is licensed as part of the FDMEE product. You can purchase this adapter. It was developed in partnership with a third-party SAP partner named Bristlecone. So Oracle obviously can't go out and write code that goes against SAP's tables because there would likely be a lawsuit, and they want to avoid that. So they partnered with an SAP partner to develop the technology to generate that. So the adapter provides connectivity to multiple components within SAP. I'm going to call them components for now, for lack of a better term. You can integrate with the new GL, which is just a layout structure of the general ledger, where you have additional fields that help you in your data process. So things like intercompany partner, profit center, cost center are on the trial balance record that comes out of new GL. Classic GL is an older view of the trial balance, which was pretty limited in the fields that it contained. I believe it contained company code and account, obviously the balances, but didn't include things like the cost center and profit center. There is also an adapter to get into profit center and cost center, call them subledgers for lack of a better term, to pull more detailed balances out of there, as well as vendor and customer, so any AAP and AR information. And finally, there's a BW adapter. So for this client, we used the new GL adapter because we just needed financial statement data. The adapter actually generates ABAP code. ABAP is the language that SAP uses to get data out of its out of its underlying repository. Think of it as SQL for SAP. And the adapter provides drill-through capabilities. And this was the key item that SM Energy needed and wanted. They wanted to be able to drill back into SAP to investigate balances and understand what's going on there. And later in the PowerPoint or in the presentation, I will show you screenshots of the drill-through. SM was kind enough to allow us to take some screenshots. We've obviously obscured the financial data because it's obviously confidential, but you can see the overall functionality. Some considerations coming out of the project, kind of lessons learned or things that we knew kind of going into the project that we just needed to be aware of. The adapter doesn't recognize any configured or custom fields in SAP. And one of the configured fields that happens in oil and gas is what's called the work breakdown structure, or WBS element. And this particular field is critical for certain items, particularly around volumes and CapEx. So the adapter not recognizing that led to some other decisions needing to be made. From a performance perspective, the adapter runs in console mode, which is just kind of a technical item. It's running interactively as opposed to in a batch process in the background. So we've continued to work on some performance enhancements to address that, and we've been partnering with Oracle and Bristol-Cone to continue to optimize the performance there to get the best and most out of it that we can. And as part of that, we've had to look at the LKMs, which is the ODI component that's used to move data from when SAP generates the data file over to FDMEE, so we've worked through that. Things to consider if you're looking at the adapter is that the adapter is actually being enhanced. It's being rewritten to some degree by Bristol-Cone to capture some of the things that were learned as part of this project, and as well as other projects that Oracle partners have undertaken. The last item here, and we'll talk about this a bit more, is that the adapter extracts the full trial balance in a single view setting. So we can extract on a year-to-date basis or a monthly activity/periodic basis. So that becomes important as we think through the integration here. Another component we used was the open interface adapter, and this is technical, but I'm including it in the presentation to give you some flavor as to the capability of FDMEE. So when you think about in your organization, how can I use this product? This is another thing that I like the community to be aware of. FDMEE can obviously process flat data files. If you can open a file in Notepad and you can view it and it makes sense, it looks normal, then you can process that data through FDMEE. It can process any flat file. The other nice thing that FDMEE has, in addition to the flat file capability and the adapter capability, is what they call the open interface adapter. And what it is it provides you a direct link to a relational repository. So we needed to integrate with the data warehouse, and we also needed to integrate with the rapid marts, or what I'll refer to as the SAP data warehouses, because that was the internal terminology that was used by the project team. Those were both relational things. They sat on SQL Server. So the open interface adapter allows us to create a direct connection to those, no flat file needed, reach in, pull the balances, process them through FDMEE. And the way this works is there's kind of a two-step process here. You've got the source system in green there, and then you've got a staging table, essentially. It's the open interface table in the FDMEE repository. You take the data from the source system and you populate, before the import happens, that open interface table. And there's three ways to do it. You can build something on the relational side. So on the source system, I could build a stored procedure or something of that nature. I could do it through ODI and have ODI actually populate that. Or I could just use an FDMEE event script to populate that table. So the table gets populated, and then as part of the import process, FDMEE pulls balances from that open interface table and continues them through the normal workflow you see. This whole process to populate that staging table is blind to the end user. It's not as though they have to run two independent processes, particularly the way we built it with the before import event script. So just a little bit of an overview to help you understand features and functionality. Locations and data load rules, these are obviously core to FDM-EE. A location, if you're not familiar with it, if you don't have FDM today, it's just a container of data. It's a way for us to isolate a particular data set. And a data load rule is a further breakdown of that. Our best practice and what we like to implement at customers, particularly when you're thinking about something with SAP that's very logical, you've got company codes, and that's very easily identifiable to an entity dimension or a company dimension within the planning application here. So we created a location per company code. Technically, you kind of need to. The SAP adapter expects you to extract on a company-by-company basis, but it also, you can configure that, but it makes a lot of sense to do that for a number of reasons, security and performance being the two biggest. So we created one for each company code. Company code 1000, 1057, 10008, etc. And then we needed to create data load rules that were actually a subset of that data. And the reason we did that, if you remember when I was talking about the SAP adapter before, when we extract balances from SAP, we're extracting the entire trial balance. And we're extracting it on a year-to-date basis or a periodic basis. Well, this is a planning application, not an HFM application. So when we load the balance sheet, we load it on a year-to-date or ending balance view of the data. But on the income statement side, we're actually loading the periodic activity. So in order to accommodate that, we had to create a data load rule to pull our balance sheet data in the year-to-date view and the income statement in the periodic view. And we'll talk about how we handled that. But that was an important design decision that needed to be made. On the mapping side, some of it was extraordinarily straightforward. So for example, the account dimension was simply a pass-through of the GL account. We had to flip signs for liabilities, equity, and revenue accounts. Generally, you need to do that, given the financial intelligence of the Hyperion stack. Company was a simple pass-through, but the one that kind of gave us a little bit of a rub was the entity dimension. And the entity dimension, we built some scripting process around it, and we also used a combination of explicit and pass-through maps. The version dimension, while it defaulted to a single member, we actually associated that with the profit center of SAP, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we dive a little bit deeper into the scripting processes that needed to be built to support this integration. So I was talking a bit more about the mapping component around accounts. You can see here's just a little print screen of their maps. So 3, 4, 5, and 6, those accounts pass through to themselves, and this screen doesn't show it, but we were flipping the sign there. The 6 accounts above that are listed as explicits, we were not flipping the signs because those were actually contra accounts. And then the 9 series was statistical, so we ignored those. We did not load those into planning. And then everything else we simply passed through. So really easy, straightforward, shows the power of FDM mapping tables where we can use a combination of explicit maps to override default or catch-all like maps, similar to what we had below. We're also doing some parsing here, not so much parsing, but we're doing some trimming, where we're removing those first 4 zeros, because the SAP account is actually 10 digits, I believe. So those first 4 zeros get removed, because in planning we didn't want those irrelevant zeros. We used batches. So batches allowed us to automate the process. And so instead of having to process each company individually going into the workflow and executing 2 data load rules for each company, we automated the entire process using FDM's out-of-the-box capabilities to do that. But then the real magic of this was generating the email status and showing the customer, once they kick this off, Once it's done processing, they get an email. They don't have to continually monitor it in FDMEE. Instead, they get an email that shows them which locations were processed, which data load rules, and what the status was. Did it load into SSpace or planning okay, or was there a problem? Did one of the processes fail somewhere along the way? So you can see a quick screenshot there that the 1085 company balance sheet failed to validate. There was an attachment that shows some different things, and we'll talk through that attachment in a bit here. You can see that a couple companies failed to import, and that's because those companies weren't actually active yet. We included them in the batch. It's kind of a known error, but they now, in the past couple months, have actually activated those companies, so now they don't get an import error anymore. But this is really, in my opinion, a nice way to show somebody quickly what the status of their load is. So now we're going to get into the heavy lifting. What were the things here that we really needed to account for that didn't use out-of-the-box functionality? As an organization, and I think this is a leading practice, you should always attempt to keep it simple. That's a mantra in the consulting world. Scripts are extraordinarily powerful and allow us to do a lot of things, but we don't want to overuse them. We want to use them where needed to help us enhance the functionality or to address functionality that's simply not there, or to build something that's going to save us time. So we used a series of event scripts as well as custom scripts. So our events, we were doing things before the import process actually brought data into the application. After the data came in and after the import was complete, we were running scripts there. We did things before the map started the process, and then after the validation step was complete, we ran another process. And we're going to talk through each one of these in detail, and I'll explain what was happening and why we did it. Likewise, excuse me, we also did things before a batch process runs, some kind of prep work, and we did this for performance reasons. We also did things after the batch executed so that we could provide that email status. So with that, let's jump in. What were we doing with the data before it was importing? What were we doing in the application before the import? So this script actually executes automatically. That's why it's called an event script. Event scripts, think of them like Excel-based macros. So when you write a macro in Excel, you can either run that using the macro command run button, or you can have it attached to a workbook event. So before a workbook is saved, when something changes in a particular cell, et cetera, et cetera. Event scripts in FDMEE work the same way they did in FDM Classic as well. And a certain event or trigger happens in the application, in this case, data being imported. So what were we doing here? A couple of things. We were populating that staging table that when I went over the Open Interface Adapter, I talked a bit about that staging table and how we get data into there. So we needed to continue to populate that for the CapEx and volume data from the SAP Rapid Mart, or the SAP warehouse as it was referred to during the course of the project. So that before data import script runs, it's actually called before import, that would run a SQL query and transfer the data into the staging table so that FDMEE during the actual data import had data to get from its staging table. So that was one item there. The other item that we did, and this was as a result of seeing application functionality that we wanted to override and make a bit more logical, was the POV. When you run a data load rule and extract data using an adapter from SAP or from EBS or from PeopleSoft, the data does not get deleted from the application until the extract process completes successfully. Well, in the event that it doesn't complete successfully, the workflow doesn't really give you an indication of that. You still have a goldfish, the data is still there, because it's the data that was there before you started the process. And so we thought that that was problematic. We thought that was not overly intuitive, because you'd have to go to the process details screen and actually see that the process failed, instead of visually seeing it with no workflow, no data. So we wrote the script to actually delete the data and to reset the workflow being the fish. So the import and validate fish, those things would all go away as soon as the process to integrate data was initialized. And that's unique to adapter-based integrations. It doesn't work the same way for files. So we built that in to give a little bit more intuitive nature to the users of the application, that if you see a goldfish, it means your data imported successfully, which it should obviously be the case. After the data imported, so when we populate the open interface table, the SAP adapter generates the data file, and the data gets into the FDMEE repository. We're doing a couple of things there, more than a couple, a few things here. There's a mapping type called blank that's now available in FDMEE, and what it does is it says, when my field is blank, then map it to this particular value. And the theory of that is great, and it was built largely for PeopleSoft implementations. So when you're writing back to PeopleSoft, certain fields can be null, so you would simply write blank as the target, and that would work perfectly fine. Or something would come out of PeopleSoft as a blank, and you could map that to somewhere in your target system. Well, that works if that field has at least one space. Well, when it comes out of SAP and it's a blank field, it doesn't actually work because that field is 0-bit length. There's nothing there. There's no space. So we replaced those null values with a single space so that that blank mapping could work across our different dimensions. Second thing we did was, if you remember back to the slide that I had where we showed the relationship between the SAP chart fields and the Hyperion planning dimensions and how we came and brought all that together, there was the entity dimension and the version dimension that I put an asterisk on, and we had the entity, or the cost center or well as the entity, and the profit center as the version, the source chart field that makes up that source value to be mapped. There were certain accounts, and this is one of the values of FDMEE and the Hyperion suite of products in general, is that what was found during data validation was that there were certain fields that were set up, or certain accounts that were set up incorrectly in SAP. They didn't have designations that they needed to have on them, so certain fields weren't being populated systematically, and so the data was inconsistent. So in that case, we could use the profit center dimension to map the data where we needed it to be in the entity dimension of planning. So the entity dimension was based on the cost center field in SAP, except in certain account instances where we would have to override that and make the profit center the source dimension for the entity, and then that would map through to the appropriate entity in planning. So we did that override, basically resetting the source entity from cost center to profit center for those list of accounts, and that happened after the data was imported. The big one, and the one that really drove a lot of design decisions that we had to do after the data was imported, is the idea that I told you, when you import the trial balance from the SAP adapter, you're getting the whole trial balance, and you're getting it in one view, either year-to-date or periodic. So we had to create two data load rules, one that pulled the trial balance in a periodic fashion and one that pulled it in a year-to-date fashion. So when we ran the income statement data load rule, we would actually delete the balance sheet data from the application for the income statement data load rule. And we would do the reciprocal for the balance sheet data load rule. So that when we actually went to the point of exporting data to Hyperion planning, the income statement data load rule actually only contained income statement data. It extracted the full trial balance, but we removed the balance sheet data through a script so that we could push over only the data in the right view that we needed. All right, before map processing. So a couple things to note here. This, again, is an event script. It occurs automatically when the mapping process begins. I want to be clear about something here. The mapping process happens at 2 points, or potentially 2 points in the FDM application. Before or during the import step, maps are actually being applied. And then, if you initialize the validate step after a map has been changed, the maps will be reapplied. And so there's 2 places where this can happen. So we didn't do this as part of the import because you could actually have this happen after the import is complete. And so we did a couple of things. We did one major thing here, and this is the one that's really kind of cool and neat, and you can think about in your organization of how could I do the same thing with my master data. And this was building our entity maps based on the master data. So for SM Energy, wells and cost centers are base level members in SAP. So think about wells being related to gross margin and above, and cost centers obviously related to operating expenses. Well, cost centers existed in Hyperion planning at each individual cost center. And I think that makes sense to most people. Generally, a lot of people are planning at the cost center level. The wells, on the other hand, are an actual accumulation of multiple wells into what's called a node in planning. So they have 7,000 wells that collapse into several hundred nodes. And the relationship between the well and the node can change year over year. The business is very dynamic. Things are being moved. Joint ventures are being changed, all those different things, so there can be realignment. Well, instead of building that mapping table from those 7,000 wells into the several hundred nodes and having to maintain that, we knew that we had that relationship in SAP already. So from the RapidMart that was spun out, we were able to source the well-to-node relationship and build the mapping table based on that. So the data comes out of SAP at the well level, and the mapping tables of FDM take that from the well to the node. Those mapping tables get populated in FDM-EE before any maps are applied based on the metadata that sits in SAP. We've done this type of integration with DRM. If you have any type of master data management solution, you can leverage this same type of approach. Really powerful stuff, really leading edge. This is exactly where Oracle is going with DRM and FDM-EE. So this was a really cool implementation of it. Saves the organization a ton of time because they're consistently having, otherwise they'd consistently have to go in and make these updates. So pretty powerful stuff. Here's just a quick shot of it. So you can see this is the entity map. So different wells mapping up to different nodes. We had exceptions so if somebody wanted to override that relationship that existed in the SAP hierarchy for business purposes, or they wanted to ignore things, we were able to do that and not impact those particular maps. And then at the bottom, we were able to use kind of our pass-through mapping, where we simply took the cost center and passed it through. You can see there's the blank mapping that we used. So when there was no well or cost center on a particular record, mainly around the balance sheet, we were able to push things to the no entity member of planning. So really powerful. All right, after validation. So after the validation step occurs, we implemented what we call our RANZEL standard S-Space Enhanced Validate. And what this is doing is it's looking at the mapped data set, and it's comparing it against the dimensionality of S-Space. Is the data that you just mapped able to be loaded to S-Space? Does that member exist across all of your intersections, across all of your records? When it doesn't, it fails. You get a report so that you're not pushing a partial data set into S-Space or planning. So very useful, helps you identify if you need to refresh your metadata in planning, if you need to update your maps. It happens at the validate, after the validate step completes, so that you can quickly make that change and then push your data through to planning. Batch processing. So before the batch, this is every time a batch is initialized by the administrator or the end user, it goes in and it does a couple of different things. What we found with the adapter is it was leaving its staging tables sitting in the FDM-EE database. So overall, your database size is growing with every incremental run. So we dropped those staging tables just to keep the database compact and performing well. And then as part of the batch process, we actually import the well to node or the entity mapping at the beginning of that so that it doesn't have to be redone for every location that's processing. And that was done purely for performance. On the batch side, when a batch is running, that functionality of before processing the maps is actually disabled, and it's disabled automatically so that we know we did it before the batch started. Our tables are refreshed, our mapping tables are refreshed, we know they're good. Now we can just go through and we don't have to worry about doing that 10 or 12 or 15 times depending on the number of locations that are processing. Then after the batch processes, we generate your email status. So the batches in FDMEE are out of the box, they're on the web, you can configure them to run on different schedules, you can run them on an ad hoc basis. But again, with the out-of-the-box functionality, you've got to go and you've got to look to see what's the status. We built that up so that the status is automatically sent out to administrators as well as any particular end users. That will tell them, for the companies that they're responsible for, hey, the load went okay or it failed. In the event of the S-Space Enhanced Validate failing, we actually attach that report if they're running missing maps, which there should never be for SM Energy because every dimension had some form of pass-through map or catch-all map. But if there were, it would attach the items that needed to be mapped to the report. So really quick snapshot, hey, I know my data's good, or I've got to take additional action. Very active feedback loop. So let's bring it all together. I know I've thrown a lot at you. I've talked about a lot of different things. Let's just look at the process here. So you've got in the middle of the screen, import, validate, check. You're used to those workflow steps. So what's going on? Left-hand side, we've got our data warehouse, our data mart, SAP ECC. Data's starting to come in. So before that happens, we're staging the balances from any of those data warehouses or data marts, and we're clearing that workflow. We're getting rid of those fish. Because again, found a little bit of an opportunity in the software where we needed to get rid of that data so that the user could actually see that, yes, indeed, the data did process successfully. It didn't fail somewhere along the line, and the workflow status simply didn't get updated. Afterward, we're doing our source dimension overrides where we were taking our profit center for those distinct list of accounts and pushing that as the source entity instead of the cost center, as well as getting rid of that balance sheet and income statement data from the reciprocal data load rules. We're importing our entity maps when we're doing this interactively. Again, if you wrap a batch around this, that import of the entity maps is actually happening before any of this workflow starts. Afterward, we're running the S-Space Enhanced Validate to make sure that we're not going to get any load errors when we push to S-Space. Before we get to export, FDMEE actually provides you the ability to run calc scripts against planning that will clear the data, and it will clear it based on the data being processed, so the time period, the scenario, the company, all those different things. We were running those clears before, and then after the export completes, we run the aggregation. So for SM Energy, they click the batch, they let it run, and at the end, all their data's in, and it's all aggregated in Hyperion Planning. No additional steps needed. So I promised I'd show you drill through. So here's the drill through screen. Now this takes me, I'm in FDMEE, I see a balance, I want to understand that balance a little bit more. Maybe I want to drill into the wells a little bit and see what's going on there. Who knows? I need to drill into the ledger and see something. So when I drill, I get back into SAP. I wanted to show you this is a web-based browser. So you can see the little IE icon there. It's actually bringing you into SAP. You're logging in one time. Brings up the report, kind of standard report for SAP. You want to investigate further, you click on cumulative balance, and you continue to kind of drill in. You're now in SAP, native SAP functionality here. I can see the different transactions that make up this particular balance. I can continue drilling in if SAP has additional detail on any one of these lines. Again, you're in SAP, all the functionality that's there takes over, and you can continue to drill down to get your information. So just to show it again, you land on this report when you drill back from FDMEE. Again, you can drill, I didn't specify this, but you can drill from financial reports, Smart View, or the planning web interface. When you initialize that first drill, you land in FDMEE. FDMEE will show you the source records that make up that balance that you're investigating. So in the case of a node, you would see the wells that got mapped into that node. So you might have 100 lines that collapse into one. If you see something in one of those wells that doesn't quite make sense, you drill from FDMEE into SAP, and this is where you land. And from there, you can continue to drill by clicking on any one of the balances and drill into that particular balance to understand what are the transactions that are making that up, what are the journal lines, etc. All right, so some technical lessons learned. There was some tuning that needed to happen on the adapter, some of the things that we needed to do in terms of the view dimension, being able to pull income statement data on a periodic basis and the balance sheet data on year-to-date basis. Work through that. We continue to partner with Oracle and Bristol-Cone to optimize and get as much performance out of the adapter as we can. So that's kind of a continual improvement there. We talked about that workflow for adapter-based integrations, the idea that we need to delete the data out of FDMEE and we've got to delete the fish so that somebody knows, did my import complete successfully, or is that old data that's kind of hanging out? The blank mapping we talked about, and the after batch script. This is actually a bug that we discovered in the software, that instead of waiting until the batch is complete, the after batch script gets initialized and immediately. So we were getting inconsistent results around that. We were able to work around it, but it was a little bit of a technical lesson learned. So some hiccups in the process, just like any project, but the measure of a good project is not whether or not you have any hiccups, but how you address them when they come along. At the end of the day, we were able to get live in the time frame that we specified or that the client needed, and we were able to actually help identify issues in the new GL system. We were able to identify those accounts that didn't have the appropriate designations on them. So overall, very successful. So it's okay to have a problem during your project as long as you can work around it, and we were able to. So with that, I will throw it over to questions and let's see if we have anything available to us.
Okay, Tony, first question here. Is the SAP new Simple Finance release using HANA and BPC? And then follow-up to that is, why did SM Energy decide to stay with HFM?
Okay. So let me address the first portion of that question first regarding Simple Finance release, HANA, and BPC. I'm an Oracle implementation consultant. I do not play in the SAP world. Oracle is where I live. While I integrate SAP data, we don't integrate anything with HANA or with BPC. So I can't provide you a value-add answer there. I apologize for not being able to do that, but I just want to be clear that any answer I give you would be misinformation potentially. The second portion of the question, why did SM decide to stay with HFM? I may not have been clear about this during the course of the presentation, but SM Energy does not own HFM. They use Hyperion Planning to not only do their planning, but also to consolidate their actuals. And one might question, why not HFM and why planning? Well, if you look at what HFM is really great at, intercompany activity and eliminations, minority ownership and equity pickup, translation. So those are some of the key things HFM is known for, obviously consolidation. I think that kind of goes without saying. Well, SM Energy doesn't have any intercompany activity. They don't track it in their financial statements. They don't have any translation because they're US-based only. And if we're talking about consolidation, they don't track any of their joint ventures as minority interest in equity pickup or any of those things. They don't do that. So then the last piece that they really need is consolidation. Well, planning and S-Space can consolidate pretty nicely through their hierarchies if you don't need any of those other features and functions. So they've been able to achieve a financial close using Hyperion Planning. So they stayed with Hyperion Planning. They didn't feel that they needed to procure HFM and add another system into their Hyperion suite of products. So that hopefully addresses your question there.
Thanks so much, Tony. We are coming up to the hour, so I am going to bring closure to this webinar. Additional questions related to this webinar may be emailed to seminars@ranzel.com, and we will respond to you directly. A recording of this webinar will be available on our website shortly, where you may also find a number of previous webinars posted. Our webinars cover a range of topics, so we encourage you to visit our website to view upcoming webinars that you may find valuable. Our next webinar is tomorrow, and it is being hosted live at 10 a.m. and again at 2 p.m. and will provide attendees with a practical guide to understand and use HPCM's management ledger. Please visit our website to learn more about and register for this webinar. And you can also find viewable recordings of past webinars there as well. Thank you to our audience for joining us, and thanks to Tony for sharing your knowledge and expertise during this presentation. This concludes today's webinar.